Welcome back to the MenuDocs YouTube channel. My name is Doug, and this is Intro to JavaScript, Episode 2. In our first episode, we covered the installation of Node.js, and we even wrote a simple Hello World program. So in the Episode 1, you'll have remembered that I referred to this Hello World as a string. And a string is a type of data that we can use in JavaScript to hold, data. There are several different types of data in JavaScript. There are numbers, strings, booleans, symbols, objects, arrays. Those are more complicated. We'll get to those later. But we need somewhere to store this data. So what we can use are variables. And variables are not keywords, but they're words that you define a meaning to in JavaScript that store a particular type of data. We can declare these variables by using some keywords. There are three main ones that you need to be familiar with. Var, which is not so much used now as it's more of a legacy support option. It can cause some scoping issues in your code if you use it. So what we recommend you use is let. Now let is a more recent addition to JavaScript than var, and it prevents some scoping issues that you may encounter down the road if you were to use var. So these are great. Those first two are great for values that you want to maybe reassign down the road. So let's say you want to change the value of that variable. These are what you want to use, preferably let, but var will also work. The third one is const. And this is used when you want to declare a variable that you're not going to change the value of down the road. This is a constant, and it's something you can't change. It's more memory efficient, but it can't be reassigned down the road. So you want to use this when you can to save on memory and performance, but you have to keep in mind that you can't reassign it down the road. You will get an error if you try. We're going to stick with let for right now because, that's what you're going to be using for the majority of your reassigned variables. So let's do let my first variable. Now, this is a perfectly valid declaration. Now we have a variable called my first variable that is reassignable, but we don't have anything in it. It's just kind of empty right now. Think of it like a box. It's a container, but it's got nothing in it. So we want to give it something to store for us so that we can use it down the road. So let's go ahead and revisit what I said about Hello World. Now this is a string. Now what a string is, it's a series of characters. It can be one character or it can be many characters, but it's a series of characters. So when we typed in Hello World, you see that it's a string of these characters. So the capital H, and then the E, and then the L, and then the L, and the O, and further on, you get it. But this is a string. This is what we refer to in JavaScript as a string. There are other types of data that we can use. So mainly number and Boolean values. So a number is, just exactly what it sounds like. It's a number. It could be, that number. It can be this number. It can be whatever you'd like it to be. It can be a decimal point. It can be or an integer. The last data type that I mentioned is Boolean. Now this is a true-false state, so you can have it be true, and you see how the color of it changed there because it's a keyword in JavaScript. True is a keyword in JavaScript that is a Boolean value. The other Boolean value is, of course, false. So we have true and false as our two Boolean values. Now in JavaScript there's something called falsy and truthy, and we'll get to that later on. But for right now, all you need to know is for the Boolean values you have true and you have false. So let's go ahead and assign this to be the hello world that we had from last episode. And if you'll remember, our code from last episode was console.log hello world. But let's say we wanted to, use this down here. Well, now we've used it twice. Why would we write it out twice when we can use our variable to go ahead and access that value? So what we can do is inside our console log here, we can go ahead and do my first variable. And this is JavaScript going, okay, I have a console log statement here, and he wants me to log out this. What is this? What is my first variable? And then JavaScript looks back to where it was declared and where it was assigned, and it goes, okay, here's the declaration. Oh, that's what I stored. That's what he wants. In the console log here, if we save this code and we run it by using the same node index.js we got before, you'll see we get the same output. So we get the same hello world here because the program is going and looking up the value of my first variable. This is powerful. We can use this to represent things in our code or modify things in our code. So something that's very common that you'll come across a lot in JavaScript is string manipulation. String manipulation means taking this string and doing something with it. It could be adding to it, it could be subtracting from it, it could be, splitting this up into two different strings, it could be all kinds of different things. So let's go ahead and look at some of those that we can do right now. So my first variable, we can go ahead and we'll go ahead and reassign it for right now. So this is how you reassign a variable. Actually, let's touch on this first. So reassigning a variable changes its value. So you see here, we don't have the let keyword because it's already declared. We don't have to declare it again with another keyword. But what we do want to do is assign this variable to be something else. So actually, let's go ahead and pop this down 2 lines so that we can see what it was before we changed it. And then let's go ahead and change this to, hello, I'm different now. So if we go ahead and do another console log here, my first variable, you'll see if we run this program again, hello world, and then it says, hello, I'm different now. And that's because up here, we took the variable, my first variable, and we assigned it to be a new value. And this new value is the string, hello, I'm different now. And by logging this out, we can see before we changed it, its value, and it's after we changed it, its value. And this is very important to understand because it's the basis of what we're going to be doing going forward. Very rarely are you going to, manually interact with a string. More likely than not, you'll be interacting with a variable that represents a string. So I talked about some string manipulations. Let's look at some of those. So my first variable, and then we're going to reassign it. But before we reassign it, we have to get the string that we're going to manipulate. So my first variable again. So if we think about this, we're saying, hey, we're going to take this value and then we're going to assign it to be, this other thing. But first we look up the value of the variable. So my first variable, so it's going to go, okay, he means this hello world piece here. And then we're going to add a space because at the end of this exclamation point, we don't want our text to be right up against that. So we're going to add a space here. And then we're going to say, I'm alive. And if we save that and we run it again, it's going to say, hello world, I'm alive. And that's because we took my first variable and we concatenated the string using this plus symbol here. And then we added the string space, I'm alive. And we assigned this whole string, because this is a string here, because we're adding a string to a string. We're concatenating 2 strings together. And we assigned it to be this my first variable. If we call it down here, it goes, okay, it was declared up here. Oh, wait, I see it was reassigned down here. Okay, gotcha. This is what I want. So that's kind of how you manipulate strings on a very base level, and we'll get much more advanced in string manipulations as we go forward. So looking at another data type, we have numbers. We had numbers. So let's go ahead and we'll see what console log does with a number. So we'll go ahead and print it out, and you see here we get our 12 out in the console, but it's a different color in the console because it's a different type of data. So if we were to change this into a string and then run it again, you'd see it's back to gray because it's actually just a string. Even though it's 12 and 12 is a number, it's wrapped in these quote marks, so it's a string. But if we take those away and run it again, you see it's back to the different color there because it's a number now. And numbers have different things that we can do with them. So my first variable equals my first variable plus 1. Let's think about this here. So my first variable is going to be assigned to be my first variable again. So this is just this. So if we think about this, it's going to be my first variable is equal to 12, because that's what we're calling here, plus 1. So if we go ahead and log this out, we save it and log it out, we'll see 13 because we added 1 to my first variable. Now, something to note is this is going to reset to 12 the next time we run the program, the next time we run the program, and so on and so forth, because we're just at reaching the end of the file here. So if we run it again, we'll get 13. We run it again, we'll get 13. That'll never change because we have no persistent storage, which is a whole nother thing. We'll get into that much later in the series. We have 12 plus 1, and then we log it out. Now, what if I want to double this? Now, in JavaScript and in many other programming languages, the multiplication symbol is actually an asterisk. So we'll go ahead and we'll say my first variable times 2, and that's 24. And much like multiplication, we have division, which is just a slash. And now we have 6. And then we have our minus sign, so -2. So we save that and run it, and now we get 10, because 12 minus 2 is 10. There are other things we can do, and we'll get into those later. They include modulus and stuff like that. But for right now, you know, adding and subtracting, multiplying, dividing, those are the core basic ones that we want to be familiar with. Now, the last data type I mentioned was true, or a Boolean, which can be true. So if we log it out here, we see it's a different color. It's not a string because it's a Boolean. But if we add the quotes, we'll see that it goes, you know, back to gray because, you know, now it's just a string that happens to say true. But now it's a Boolean value. And Booleans are interesting because they enable logic. So if we, and this is going to come later on in the series, but we can start to work with if statements and conditionals and all of that kind of stuff. But for right now, just understand that it can be a true or a false value, and that it's not just a string. So going on the data types, we can now talk about data structures. And that's outside the scope of this particular video, so we're not going to go too in depth with the actual structures themselves, but we just need to be familiar with what they are and what they may look like. So here we have an array, and think of an array as a list, and a list of, you know, data. It can be a list of strings, it can be a list of numbers, it can be a combination of the two, it can be Booleans, it can be all kinds of different stuff. But just think of it as a list, and just know that they exist and that they are a list, and they will be worked with later on in the series. And our last type that we're going to talk about today, just very briefly mention, is objects. And objects are a huge part of JavaScript. JavaScript is an object-oriented language, so a lot of the things that we work with are actually objects behind the scene. But those are usually denoted by curly braces. We can take what we learned today, and we can even let another variable equal a string of 12, and then, oh, let's go ahead and add another number to that. But we'll actually make it another number. And here's a good point. Let's go ahead and declare a second variable. And then we can declare the second variable based on the value of the first variable. So another variable plus 1. So something interesting is going to happen here, and it's kind of a quirk of JavaScript. Not a lot of languages do this. But if we were to log out second variable here, what do you think we'll get? Take a moment now and pause and maybe go down to the comments and write what you think is going to come out from this bottom console log statement.
Today's video is proudly powered by our partner, Oxide Hosting. Get your products hosted by them with their cheap, reliable services. So what are you waiting for? Check them out in the description below.
Okay, you could have paused the video and written down there, but we're going to go ahead and execute the code now to see what actually happens. And what we get is 121. And that's very strange because 12 plus 1 is 13. It's not 121. But you have to remember these are different data types. So another variable is actually a string. It's not a number. Even though it has numbers in it, it's not a number. So what's happening is JavaScript is taking this 1 and it's going, how am I going to add this number to this string? In JavaScript, the way the JavaScript works is it casts this to a string. So all we're doing is concatenating two strings together, even though this is a number in the code itself. When JavaScript gets interpreted, it goes ahead and tries to cast this to a string to concatenate it with another variable. And that's how we get the 121 that we get down here. Now, if we were to take these quotes away and just make it a normal, regular old number, we're going to get that 13 that we expected before. So just a little fun fact, a little tidbit from the JavaScript quirks there that casts this to a string if this is a string. That's all we're going to do for today. We introduced you to variables and string manipulation and data types, and there's going to be a whole lot more coming at you guys, but we're going to try to take this one little bitty step at a time to make sure you guys have a great foundation. So this is Doug with MenuDocs signing off. Hope you enjoyed, and have a great rest of your day.